What is going on, dogs? Welcome back. It is Holden. This is Dog Talk. Started this completely different than what I normally do, but we're going to roll with it one way or another. Glad to have you guys back here with us as we get prepared for another show here today. And I'm looking forward to it. Just looked at the AP poll. It just dropped. And right off the top of the show, we're going to talk about it. Dawgs back on top at the number one spot. We don't need it. A lot of us don't want it. Don't care if we got it. Don't want to have it until December. But we got it. We're the number one team in the nation yet again this week after, again, the AP poll just dropped just 15 minutes ago or so. I just happened to look over at it about 20 minutes to 2, and I saw that it had already dropped, and I was like, my goodness. So I started going in and doing all the visual stuff to put up. But hey, Dawgs back on top. Again, a lot of us don't want it, but we're going to have to defend it one way or another. Until you're not, you're going to be on the top, and that's where we are. So they feel like Georgia's good enough to be at the top. Hey, I think Georgia's still good enough to be one of the top teams in the country one way or another. For some reason, we just don't play that well with the number one next to our name. So take it with a grain of salt. Take it with what you will. It does not matter until December, but this is where we are. I think week in and week out, whether that number one's next to you, 2, 3, 4, it doesn't matter. Every team is going to give you everything they got from this point forward because you are the defending national champions. That's another reason for them to give you everything that they've got. And just having that number one next to your name seems to just add more to that. But nonetheless, that's where we start the show. Dawgs back on top, sitting at the number one spot. A little bit of change up from there, though. It's not Alabama at number 2. It's Ohio State. Ohio State does jump up as well to that number 2 spot. Alabama falling down to the 3 spot after a game that we're going to talk about later on in this episode that every single one of you know about. And you talk about getting in the Twitter feed. My goodness, what a night it was having to deal with that. But we're going to talk about that here in just a little while. Clemson jumping up to that 4 spot over Michigan. Michigan falling down 1 spot. So in the game that they play. But again, we're going to talk about all of that nearing the end of the show. Tennessee jumping all the way up to that number 6 spot. Big matchup in Knoxville coming up this weekend. We'll preview a little bit of that, but most of that we're going to wait for the Thursday episode coming up. You know how that goes. Record it Thursday. You guys get it on Fridays and check it out before we get to the season's games for that week. USC falling down to 7, even though all of these teams within the top 10 are undefeated. Really in the top 11 before you get down to Oregon at 12 with the one loss. Only loss they have on the season is to Georgia. Oklahoma State at 8. Ole Miss at 9, not moving. Penn State at 10, not moving. UCLA jumps all the way up to 11th. They jump 7 spots to 11. Oregon staying there at 12 again. TCU jumping up 4 spots to 13. Wake Forest jumping up to 14. NC State after struggling with FSU, which again I think FSU's a lot better this year. Glad to see them relevant. I'd much rather them be a 4-1, 5-1, whether they're a 4-2 team as opposed to a 0-5 or something like that. You like when they're relevant. Mississippi State jumping all the way up to 16. I agree. Again, we're going to talk about these games coming up in a minute, but Mississippi State looks really good. They look to be the real deal. Tennessee does as well. Kansas State jumping up a few spots to 17. Syracuse at 18. Kansas staying still at 19, even though they lost to TCU. They don't move at all. Cincinnati up 3 spots to 21. Texas at 22. They're not moving either. Kentucky falling 9 spots after falling to South Carolina. Surprised they stayed in the top 25, to be honest with you. But they do sit there in the 22 spot. Illinois at 24. And James Madison of the Sun Belt. How about this? 5-0, 25th, rounding out that AP top 25. That's where we sit. That's how things are. News and notes as far as injuries and things go. The only injury that I did see, it looks like Kendall Milton, obviously in this ball game yesterday, had a little bit of a groin issue that took him out of this game, and not really sure when we're going to see him back. I think there was even mention, listening to Kirby talk about it, maybe in the post-game conference, that he even said that he kind of got beat up in that Missouri game and had some groin issue, and this just kind of really took it over the top. But other than that, I mean, the normal injuries. You know, we got A.D. Mitchell in a little bit. Kirby even spoke on that a little bit. It wasn't a lot, but he did get in a little bit. And still wasn't quite 100%. You could kind of see that. Still limping around a little bit. But said that he was actually dealing with a thumb issue more than he was the ankle issue, which, you know, a thumb when you're a wide receiver, that matters. You know, if you're, really in any position, I guess it would matter. Defense, maybe not, because you could wrap it up and you just hit somebody and that's all there is to it. But an exposed thumb as a running back, lineman, something like that, that still can be kind of a painful thing. So Just wanting to get some of these guys back, get some of these guys healthy. But so far, so good. We're not going to make excuses. We're not going to do it. We're just going to keep on working with the guys that we have, because you know how it is, just like I do. It's next man up mentality. Next man's got to do the job. We have a lot of young freshmen, a lot of younger guys who have stepped up and have worked very hard for Georgia this season to get us to where we are. Just like last week, we've got a lot of people injured, guys on offense, guys on defense, wideouts, defensive backs, linemen, all these guys that are hurt. But we're not going to make the excuse, because in the end, we find a way to win, just like we did last week. Was it pretty against Missouri? No. But guess what? It's time to move on. We beat Auburn 42-10 this weekend in Sanford. What a good ball game. Got to watch about half of this and then had to just kind of pay attention through the rest of it as we kind of went and did some stuff, like I was saying in the tweet, this weekend in Kirby Smart's old hometown. So glad to go down there and spend a little bit of time anyways. But Georgia looked good, 42-10. Again, this first half of this game is kind of what we're going to talk about starting off, because it wasn't necessarily the prettiest. But in the end, again, 42-10 ends up being the end of this ball game. First quarter, scoreless, kind of battling back and forth. A lot of us were sitting there going, I just don't know. I don't know. This doesn't feel like what you want it to feel like in that first quarter. We're used to, especially the first few games of the week, which I'm going to start to kind of lean off of that, because week in and week out right now, we keep penetrating back to those first 3 games of the week and talking about how effective Georgia looked. First quarter, I even talked about this last episode. First quarter, we're driving. First 7 drives of the game against Oregon. First 6 against Sanford. And then things, weeks and weeks have gone by, and they just aren't really seeming to be exactly the same. So I'm going to try not to harp so much back to that, but that is something to kind of pay attention to and keep an eye on as well, because the first quarter here over the past few weeks, Georgia's not been quite as elite as we were those first few weeks. But then the second quarter, we started to kind of get some movement, started to get some momentum, started getting things going again. 14-3, I think it was at the end of the half. And it's actually 14-0, before they kick the field goal in the third quarter. We get another touchdown there in the third. They get a touchdown, but we get 3 in the fourth. And this is what I told you guys. Georgia seems to be a little bit of a second-half team, which I'm glad to see. I'm glad to see us continue to score. There have been years in past where fourth quarter we really don't move the ball, much less score. Now, when it's only 21-3, you probably want to move it a little bit more than that, especially when they score in the fourth quarter, making that a little bit of a closer game. Because at one point in this game, 28-3, 35-3, we started to kind of put it away there in the fourth quarter before they scored with 9:51 left to go in the game, making it 35-10. But that's as close as they would get before we scored again on a Branson Robinson run. And we're going to talk about this. I've got the keys of the game that we're going to run through as we do week in and week out. And then we're going to jump into some of the other Twitter talk that comes down to the end of this, the picks that you guys had up as well. And then we're also going to round things out by looking at some of the other games around the country. But let's dive into this Georgia-Auburn win, 42-10. And my sound did not go off at all, but that's okay. We're going to roll through it. Dogs on top, 42-10. Like I said, running game got going. We're going to jump to the keys here in just a second, but we got the running game going. Looked very good. Georgia puts up 500 yards in this game, and this is a thing that I kind of wanted to make sure I talked about in this one. The past couple of weeks when we've played Kent State, when we've played Missouri, in these tighter games, we still beat Kent State by 17. That's a 3-score ball game. In these games where they've been a little bit closer, Georgia is still putting up a lot of yards. And by the way, we're also not allowing a lot of yards against us defensively. We're still giving up points. That was one thing that I did notice. We gave up the turnovers. We're giving up the ball in plus territory for the other guys, and you can't do that. That was one of the keys of the game, but you can't do that. If you're giving the ball to them in plus territory, it's a lot easier for them to score, especially on a team that's got a really good kicker in Missouri there, because he did his job exactly like he's supposed to do, and they didn't necessarily have to get very deep in Georgia territory to be able to put points on the board. But that's one thing. Turnovers killed us. They killed us in those games because we outgained the teams by a lot, but they were still able to find the scoreboard quite often in those games. Obviously, Missouri scoring 22 there. But this one, much better. But again, Georgia offensively, 500 yards in this one, giving up 258 to Auburn. So we did a good job offensively, still moving the ball. It took a little while. It took until that second half before we really started churning it out. The ground game did their job. Stetson looked a little bit iffy there in the first half. Saw a lot of people on Twitter that were ready to get rid of him. Buy into it. I mean, I told you guys at the start of this season, unless he gets hurt and is held out of a game, Stetson Bennett is going to be your quarterback. So there's no sense in arguing about it. There's no sense in fussing and fighting. I said in it, hey, Stets, you got to hit this guy when you got a guy wide open. You have Brock Bowers wide open down the sideline, and you overthrow him. A lot of his passes have been high. I know I kind of keep seeing him do that little shoulder shrug, and I don't know if Kirby's really said anything about it. Maybe it was. Maybe he said that he fell in that Missouri game and shoulders kind of bothering him a little bit aside or something, and he's just not able to really get passes where he wants to. He's kind of trying to push the ball in some situations and places too that he doesn't need to. But he's still got the legs. He's got the legs to get the job done, as we're going to be able to tell in this game later into it. But Georgia looked good, especially, like I said, in the second half. You go up to a 14-0 lead in the second quarter, first half, excuse me. Kenny Mack gets a touchdown run in this one. Dajon Edwards also getting a 1-yard touchdown run before we get to the half, up 14-0. Then Auburn comes out, does kick a 30-yard field goal to make it 14-3 before. After that, the route was pretty much on. Georgia gets it rolling there in the third quarter with a Dajon Edwards touchdown, making it 21-3. As soon as we start the fourth, that's when Stetson takes off. Here's where the legs come in. 65-yard touchdown run, gap right up the middle. Not really. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I haven't looked deep enough yet to see that if this was a designed run call. I know Kirby made it seem like Todd Monken had dialed this up as a designed run, or if he looked to his sides and went through his progression and didn't see anything that quickly and just took off because he saw the middle of the field was open. Hey, 64-yard touchdown run. That'll do it. Running all the way down the field to take the lead at that point. Even further, 28-3 before Dajon Edwards. A couple of minutes later, a 7-yard touchdown run. Then a big touchdown pass from Robbie Ashford for Auburn for a 62-yard touchdown pass. Tackling, that's probably going to be a key point to the game next week. Got to tackle. We have 3 guys wrapped up on the guy. He gets loose from all 3 of those guys, runs down the field to score, making it 35-10. But then Branson Robinson, 15-yard touchdown run, 42-10 to put it away. 4:45 left in the game. Georgia, 22 first downs in this game compared to Auburn's 10. On the ground, this is where we're talking about it right here. Rushing for Auburn, only 93 yards on 25 touches. Georgia touches it 39 times for 292 yards, 6 touchdowns. Every single one of the touchdowns in this game came on the ground. Every bit of it. Every bit of it came from the running backs. And this is where we can basically jump to it. The completions and percentages like that, 13 for 38 for Auburn, 165 yards, 1 touchdown through the air. Stetson goes 22 for 32 for 208 yards in this one. Again, 258 total yardage for Auburn, 500 total for Georgia. We fumble it. Had a couple fumbles in this game, only lost the one. They also fumbled it a couple times, losing it the one time. 4 penalties, 45 yards for Georgia, 10 penalties, 60 yards for the other guys. Then we start looking at some of the main players in this game. Branson Robinson ends up leading the charge in this game. 12 rushes for 98 yards, right at that 100-yard mark with a 1 touchdown on the night. But Dajon Edwards right behind him, 12 touches, 83 yards, 3 touchdowns on the night. He was absolutely rolling. Kenny Mack, 8 touches, 37 yards, 1 touchdown. Stetson, even with that 3 rushes, totaled 64, which is what that run ended up being for a touchdown. Kendall Milton behind them at 2 touches for 13 yards, obviously, before going out with that groin injury. Receiving category, Lab McConkey, 5 touches, 47 yards. Oscar Delp, 3 touches, 29. Brock Bowers, even 36 yards in this game as well. We did see Carson Beck come into this one as well, but nothing running-wise. Nothing passing-wise. It all ended up being runs in this game. Defensively for Georgia, Dumas Johnson continues to roll and starting to wreak havoc. It's nice seeing that number 10 kind of busting through as much as he is in this one. 5 total tackles, 3 solos. Ryan Davis behind him at 4. 2 of which were solos. Zion Logue also with the forced fumble, I believe, or the fumble return, whatever it was, landing on the fumble there. 3 total tackles on the night. 1 of those was a solo in this game. So, look good. Georgia, again, looking really good so far through the season. Georgia 6-0 coming into this one. Glad to see it. Georgia did have to punt the ball quite often, 5 times in this game. In comparison, though, 9 punts for Auburn. So Georgia was doing their job. Let's kind of jump to some of the keys to the game because I did want to get to this and see how things looked in it because it did matter. I finally got a little bit of a visual put up for you guys watching on YouTube. Make sure you guys go and check it out, like the video, and subscribe if you have not already. Offensively, this is what we wanted to do. We did not want to have turnovers. No turnovers in this game. We did end up with the one. Wasn't the worst of all. Luckily, defensively, we were able to stop any kind of bleeding from that, but no turnovers in the game. We ended up with one, much better than what it's been in the past couple of weeks. Not only giving them the ball in plus territory for them, but allowing them for opportunities to score. We wanted to dominate in the trenches. We did that. When you're rushing the ball for almost 300 yards in a game and all of your touchdowns are coming on the ground, 6 of them like that, yeah, I think you dominated the trenches. So as that defensive lineman for Auburn said, they thought that they could dominate Georgia. Well, they learned, and they learned it the hard way. Georgia ends up being the dominator in the trenches. We check-marked that one right there and establishing the run game. Evidently, all of this goes together right here because we did. Again, 208 yards through the air, but we end up 292 on the ground. So I think we established the run game pretty well. All the keys on offense look pretty good, minus just the one little turnover there. Offensively, luckily, did not end up hurting Georgia in this one. Defensively, we wanted to get the turnovers. We did, same thing. We did end up getting a turnover in this one. Was hoping for a couple more, but in the end, this game was much, much further out of hand in this game to be able to take care of business like we wanted to. So do get one on there, not too bad. Defensive line, this is one thing I wanted to see, having Jalen Carter out of this game. I wanted to see some other guys start to step up, and I tweeted this out. It was nice to see Big 99 coming through the line again. That and Bear Alexander, seeing him come through the line quite a few times, getting the quarterback's face, flush him from the pocket, and make him try to make a play. We'll give credit out to Robbie Ashford in this game because without his legs, I think Auburn's even worse off in this game. Without his legs, even worse off. He ends up rushing for 52 yards in this game. Some of that was running for his life, but some was also he saw the gaps and just ran it through. But defensive line looked pretty good in this one. Again, we only give up 93 yards on the ground. We're getting the quarterback's face a few times too, which was it's always a good thing to see. Always a good thing to see. No sacks in this game. Did end up coming up with a couple of tackles for loss. Also getting in the quarterback's face. That was a big deal too. Third down. We wanted to get off the field on third down. And we did. We did a very good job getting off the field on third down this game, which was something that I wanted to see. My number's trying to pull up here. I'll jump over to special teams for a minute because this was kind of it's not together, but I did also want to see something special happen with special teams. There's a reason it's called special teams, and we did. I know week in and week out we've been talking about we want Lab McConkey to get a little bit more confident back there catching the ball, and I'm glad Kirby's kept him back there because week in and week out, does he have a little drop here and there? Yes. But he finally was able to do what it seems like he's been trying to do all season long, and that is getting a good return. He had one really good return in this game, which I think helped a lot with his confidence. You could see he kept catching the ball even with guys in his face, trying to make something happen. He drops one, luckily falls on it, doesn't hurt us. Give us all a pretty good scare. Most everybody wanted to fire him and get him out of the game as well, but he bounces back with a good return later in the game to finally set that at ease a little bit. So, but then back to the third down. So we did have some check mark on that with the special teams there. Did like to see that. Then third down, efficiency, like I was saying, 5 for 17 for Auburn. So Georgia did their job. 0 for 1 on fourth down. So, again, Georgia continued to do their job. Third downs, getting off the field, that mattered a lot. Looking at it offensively, which is not one of the keys to the game here, but Georgia does go 6 for 14 and 1 for 1 on fourth down. Georgia completely 100% on fourth down so far in the 2022 season. I think we're 5 for 5 maybe. If it's not 6 for 6, I think it's 5 for 5 though. Fourth downs in the season so far, 2022. So the picks look pretty good so far in the season. Are the keys to the game. We did our job in those, and I was glad to see that because, again, these are all keys that I make up. They're not anything necessarily special, I guess you'd say, but it's just what I kind of want to see Georgia do week in and week out. And I feel like if Georgia can be successful at these things, they win. They'll win the game. That's not me being a coach. That's just what I think it's going to take this week for who we're playing. And just so happens that I think a few of these, and a lot of them are repetitive, but just so happens I think a few of these hit pretty good. And hitting on them, we did good. We ended up winning the ball game 42-10. So I was glad to see that. How about Branson Robinson? How about these guys? Really, it's kind of hard for me to pick just one guy because our running room did such a great job between Jamon Edwards and Branson Robinson. I'm really going to combine the two of these guys. I want to combine both of those guys for being players of the week. Dogs of the week is what I usually call them. Branson Robinson and Jamon Edwards both coming into this game. 12 carries apiece, 98 yards for Branson, 83 yards for Jamon. But Branson, 1 touchdown. Jamon gets 3. Jamon gets 3 in this game on the ground. So 4 of the touchdowns came with these two guys here. Jamon is a junior, Branson Robinson being a true freshman. 4 touchdowns out of the 6 for Georgia in this game. So very glad to see what they're doing. Hope we can continue to see this run game progress because we do have Vandy coming up, and we're not going to overlook any team. We talked about that last week after struggling with Missouri. Can't overlook guys anymore. And we also can't overlook it because of the game that they played against Ole Miss that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. But that's your dogs of the day. We do want to get a little bit of an update on the stats leaders, and I wanted to talk about this because scrimmage yards as far as through the season, how some of these guys look, like all-purpose yards is a little bit different than just sorry, I'm getting all my stuff to pull up here, than just what it is for this game. Here we go. Got it pulled up. So this is what we look right now so far on our stat leader. Stetson Bennett sitting 13 for 138 for 200 so far on the season, and that's good enough to be right at 70%, 69% is what that is. 1744 on the yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. Have not seen a touchdown through the air for a couple of weeks from Stetson. He's still putting up pretty decent yardage through the air, but has just completely stalled on his touchdowns over the past couple of weeks. So look to see that change coming up against Vandy here this upcoming week. Rushing category, DeJon Edwards now takes the lead on this. 48 carries, 287 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Kendall Milton right behind him at 47 touches, 282 yards, and 4 touchdowns as well. And then we go through the receiving category. Brightbauer still leads that, 22 touches, 378 yards, 2 touchdowns. Lab McConkey, 25 for 313. 1 touchdown. Kenny Mack, 26 for 251. Did want to look at all-purpose yards, though, because I do think this matters. Right now, Brightbauer still leads it. 25 plays so far through the game, 460 yards total for him. That's through the air and on the ground. This season, that's 5 touchdowns. Right behind him, though, is Kenny Mack, 69 plays in this game, 450 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then you get like a Kendall Milton, 347, 5 touchdowns. DeJon Edwards, 341, 4 touchdowns. Let's see. Lab McConkey, 342 with 2 touchdowns. So a lot of these guys, we're doing good. We're spreading the ball out between the ground, between also getting the ball through the air with a couple of these guys as well. Now, on to the defensive guys, these stat leaders right now. Jamon Dumas Johnson. Sorry, you can see on the screen, and I had to put DJ because otherwise it doesn't fit on the screen. And I know it's not the prettiest visual there, but it is what it is. Jamon Dumas Johnson, 29 total tackles so far on the season, 3 assisted, 29 totals, 26 solos. Does have 4 tackles for a loss as well as 2 sacks on the season. Malachi Starks right behind him, 25 total tackles, 17 of which are solos. Does have the 2 interceptions so far through the season. Smilemana Jr. right behind them, 22 total tackles, 17 by itself, 3.5 tackles for a loss. Christopher Smith starting to pick his name back up in this thing as well. 16 total tackles, 9 of which were solos. He does have 2 interceptions on the season as well. And Georgia had an opportunity for a couple of interceptions in this game also, but unfortunately did not end up get a couple of them. Had a couple of guys with hands on the ball, just couldn't quite hold on to it, which wasn't the end of the day. Not the end of the day, but it does end up looking that way in the end. So Dogs on top, 42-10. Dogs also on top of the AP poll, sitting right now at the number 1 spot. And we'll see how long it lasts. Hopefully the Dogs can continue to roll. You got Vandy this week, get a bye week before we head to Jacksonville, and that's when the season's going to get a little bit tougher. You got Florida obviously there on the 29th. November 5th, circle that calendar. Circle it. Fairly certain it's going to be a night game. It's really the last home game for Georgia before you get Georgia Tech at the end of the season. And who wants a night game against Georgia Tech? But more than likely going to be a night game. Don't see why it shouldn't be. But that's going to get tougher through there. You got Florida at Jacksonville. I don't care how good or bad Florida is. Again, the mantra now is no longer to overlook a team. But even in playing Florida last year, if our defense isn't as stout as it was, this game's a lot closer than it was. Because that game was neck and neck for a little while until we took off literally minutes before the half right there. Tennessee, I'm gonna give them credit, much as I don't like to. You got to. Tennessee so far looks pretty good. We're going to see how they look against Alabama this upcoming weekend because that's the next matchup for them. But, again, circle your calendar because that's going to be a big game in Athens, and we're not going to sleep at all on Mississippi State because we're headed to Mississippi State this season. Not an easy place to play. Mike Leach has the offense rolling. Will Rogers, I've said week in and week out, is not somebody to overlook, and he keeps lighting it up as well. They're undefeated, continue to move up in the ranks. Kentucky, all of a sudden, A team that I thought was going to be very difficult playing in Lexington later on in the season, not necessarily looking like that anymore right now. We'll talk about that coming up here in a minute. Did pick this game, I think 34-17. Was hoping this game was going to be a little bit close, but in the end, I'm just fine with a 42-10 victory. I can promise you that. And this is where we're going to get to the picks of the week. We looked a lot better. The picks this week going 5-1. Georgia versus Auburn. I took Georgia. Did not want to take the points because, again, obviously week in and week out for the past few weeks, Georgia just hasn't looked that good against the spread. So I decided just to leave it off. Give me Georgia. I'll take the win. Texas A&M and Alabama. We're going to talk about that one coming up. Alabama does end up winning. That's all I picked, and this is the reason I did not take the spread either, because there was the opportunity for Alabama to show up and absolutely show out, but without Bryce Young, that obviously makes things tougher. Nobody anticipated the turnovers that came in this game, but Alabama does pull it off. Glad I didn't take the spread on that. That's 2-0. Tennessee, and I had a feeling Tennessee was going to roll LSU, even though it was in Baton Rouge. Again, luckily, an early kick, not a late kick, because that late nighttime game at Baton Rouge can get much, much tougher to win. But Tennessee absolutely rolls in that one. And I took the points -3, obviously, because of that. Look at there. We're starting 4-0 on the night. And then I took Mississippi State over Arkansas. And that makes me 5-0. Looked good. And then I thought Arkansas would keep it a little closer. And for a little while they did, and then they didn't. Again, KJ Jefferson not playing in this. A lot of quarterbacks not playing this week. A lot of quarterbacks not playing. KJ not playing. Will Levis not playing for Kentucky, and obviously Bryce Young not playing for Alabama. Made things a lot tougher for those teams. Made things a lot tougher for those teams in this game, and it also made two of which suffer enough to where they lost, and one of which almost loses in this game. But in this week, we turn things around, looking 5-1, much better than last week. Pulls us overall to 26-17 on the season. Look forward to that, and hopefully we can kind of continue that trend as we move forward week in and week out and try to get a little bit better on our picks, because we started the season off hot. All of a sudden, past couple of weeks after Georgia kind of struggled with teams, all of a sudden my picks started struggling too. So hopefully we can kind of pick that up as we go. Let's start to look at some of the other big games around the country. Michigan and Indiana. Michigan kind of struggled in this game for a little while before pulling away in the end, ends up winning 31-10. I think that's the reason they end up falling a spot to Clemson, who Clemson jumps up one spot above them, and Clemson in the end ends up winning as well. If my game will pop, there it goes. Beating Boston College 31-3. Tennessee again steamrolling LSU 40-13 in Baton Rouge. TCU taking down Kansas, where game day was this week, 38-31. Kansas still not a bad looking team, especially seeing what TCU was able to do to Oklahoma the other week, and my goodness, what Texas did to Oklahoma this week. Absolutely rolling them in the whatever you want to call it, Red River BB gun game. Anyway, Mississippi State rolling Arkansas 40-17. Cincinnati winning 28-24 at home against South Florida. Oklahoma State edging by Texas Tech 41-31. UCLA beating Utah 42-32. Again, this is why I'm so surprised why UCLA jumped up so far. They beat number 11 Utah by 10. They were ranked 18. That's a long way to jump when you're playing at home, to jump all the way up like they did in the polls. But they must know something we don't. Ohio State gives up 20 points to Michigan State. Ends up winning, though, 49-20. Still a big win. I don't know. Maybe it's because they gave up 20 points. That's why they decided to hold Ohio State at second instead of giving them that number one ranking. I don't know. I kind of anticipated them giving it to them just because. But then we go to Ole Miss Vanderbilt. This is what I was talking about coming up this week. We're not going to sleep on Vandy, because Vandy had Ole Miss in a bit of a pickle. Granted, it's a home game for Vandy, but they had Ole Miss in a pickle. I think they had to lead 20-17 at the half, or it was really close right at the half. And it wasn't until late in the third quarter, fourth quarter, before Ole Miss finally took off. Ends up winning this one 52-28. Arizona State upsetting Washington 45-38, taking them out of the top 25. USC beating Washington State 30-14, and this was the other one where I was saying it looked like Kentucky playing in Lexington was going to be a little tougher. Again, you're without Will Levis, and that's all it needed for Beamer Ball to apparently happen there in Lexington, as South Carolina takes down number 13 Kentucky 24-14. Wake Forest beats Army. Notre Dame upset number 16 BYU 28-20. All of a sudden, that game looks a little bit better for Ohio State up there. Whatever. Kansas State. Talk about it. This is just the way that it should be with Iowa State. These teams. Kansas State 10-9. 10-9 was the final. Kansas State beating Iowa State 10-9. What a game. NC State edges by Florida State. Florida State had this game in the bag, just couldn't hold on long enough, and NC State ends up winning it 19-17. Oregon pops Arizona 49-22. We're going to say it week in and week out. We want Oregon to win each and every week, and their offense has come alive. Georgia's defense absolutely stifled them to start the season, but their offense has come alive, and they're scoring at will. Alabama, Texas A&M. This is where we're going to end talking about these games around the country at least. Alabama, again, without Bryce Young, I'm not going to make the excuse. They're going to make the excuse. They were in the Twitter feed all night long over something that I posted that we'll talk about in a minute. But 24-20, they get the ball. They end up winning it. A&M had the ball on the 2-yard line, on 3-yard line, whatever it was, with 3 seconds left in the game. Couldn't pull it off. And Alabama kept saying, yeah, if we don't do this, if we got this guy, if we got these 2 wide receivers, we'll win the national championship. If doesn't matter. You're acting like Texas A&M had everybody on the field too. And everybody keeps saying, oh, well, their backup was a starter at the start of the season. Yeah. They took him out of the game. They benched the guy. They benched the kid, and he's not a starter for a reason. But yet he still comes into this game. I'm not going to get into the argument. You guys understand me if you're listening? You understand me? Alabama wins it 24-20. And a nail-biter there at the end. They got Tennessee at home. They got to go to Tennessee, I should say. Let me say it that way. In Knoxville, that's where, again, game day's headed. That's going to be a really big game coming up this week. And this is, I don't like to compare games because it does make it a little bit tougher to do that. And you also don't necessarily want to sit back and go, okay, this game is exactly the way Georgia's going to play, because it's not. If you start looking at it that way, again, just doesn't work out that way. Missouri literally handed the football to Auburn at the end of the game, where they lost to Auburn, and we struggled with Missouri until 4 minutes left in the game to take a lead and end up winning that one 26-22. And then we steamroll Auburn 42-10 a week later. So you can't always use those comparisons and think it is, but you at least get to see how real Tennessee is in this game. If Alabama has Bryce Young back in this game and Tennessee wins it, there's no excuse to be made. There really shouldn't be any kind of excuse to be made. Fumbles and that stuff happens. That happened to Georgia against Kent State. That's why that game was as close as most people think, even though it ended 17 points. You turn the ball over that many times against Missouri, in Missouri at night. By the way, the atmosphere was louder than I've ever heard it. I'm not saying it's the loudest place in the country. It's not what I'm saying at all. But when you do that and you give other teams momentum and opportunity, it's a lot tougher. But Georgia found a way to win. Champions find a way to win. Elite and top teams find a way to win, and that's what Georgia does week in and week out. Again, glad to see the Dogs 6-0. It's hard to believe we're halfway through the season. 6-0 as we get prepared for Vandy coming up this weekend. Now let's look into some of the Twitter talk before we wrap this thing up real quick. And I'm going to bring up the polls that we talked about, but I'm also going to bring up some of the other stuff that we had as well. Again, I did want to bring up what I tweeted last night, and evidently it's still have people, mainly Alabama fans, for whatever reason, that have decided to come and get inside of the mentions and everything. I don't know. Let's just jump to it here. Looking at some of the polls from this past week, let's see how we compared in some of our polls from this past week. And then we'll kind of wrap it up while I'm waiting on everything to load here. Again, you guys were on Twitter at DawgTalk20. You can see that up here in the corner if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, again, make sure you guys subscribe, like the video, hit that bell if you want to get the notification whenever we put up a video for week in and week out. Wherever you guys are listening on podcasts, you can click the link in the description. It will take you to YouTube. It'll take you to iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, take you to the Instagram page, Twitter, everything. Everything is right there in that. And then last but not least, if you guys want to support the show, you can always do that as well. I always leave that link in the description as well. Now getting down to the polls from this past week. This is what we had. Just doing a few on this one again, 34-17. A couple of the other picks and predictions in this game that I did want to look at, that a few of you guys did actually reach back out to on it. 31-14, pretty close there. Dogs forever. Doesn't end up being that way. 38-10. That's as close as I think you can get to a 48-10 victory, and it's dog time at UGA there. Pretty close on the pick there. 38-10. Now, Stetson Bennett, touchdowns versus Auburn. This is rushing and passing. 0-2 or 3+. 57% of you guys going with 3+. Ends up only being one. Just the one rushing touchdown is what he ends up with. Rushing touchdowns versus Auburn. Now, this is the wild one, just in general. 0 to 2, 75% of you guys go with that because we had not really got the run game going. 3+ in this one. We get 6. 75% of you guys go with 0 to 2. We end up getting 6 rushing touchdowns in this game. Georgia turnovers gained on defense. This is one of the keys that we wanted to see happen in this game, and Georgia ends up being able to get at least 1. So 22% of you guys going with 0 to 1 there, and that's where we end up in this game. 2+ was at 78%. Sorry, I can't hear if this audio is still playing, and evidently it's not, so we'll just leave it where it is. But then I want to get to the tweet. The tweet that I put up, and for whatever reason it made Alabama fans just go absolutely nuts. Even had one Alabama fan that decided to come and talk to me, and for whatever reason, I'm just not going to dive too deep in it. Did want to look at the halftime takeaways. Defense is doing a good job. Need to contain Ashford a little bit. That would be the only adjustments. Offensively, we started to move the ball. I actually meant to put in there. We started to move the ball nicely on the ground, looking for them to take that away. That did not happen. We've got to establish the pass because Stetson only had 25 yards coming in or out of the half. Obviously, he ends up looking a lot better in the end. And then the tweet of the night that absolutely, again, for whatever reason, just made people go nuts was this one. So when Georgia plays unranked Missouri in Columbia at night close, they suck. But Bama plays at home at night against unranked A&M, and it's a good game. What in the world do you mean? I don't know why. This is all I saw was the comparisons of Missouri is not as good as Texas A&M. Neither is Kent State, and I'm not saying that. That's not the comparison I'm making. I'm making the fact that Alabama is playing at home, and everybody wanted to make the excuse of, oh, well, they don't have Bryce Young. Again, I'll go back to Texas A&M is playing on the used-to-be starter that got benched because he's not as good as the starter. Backup is what we'll quote it. But they're missing other guys, too. You're missing a quarterback. You've got a great running quarterback who showed you that, used his legs in this game. But I don't think it should be considered a good game when Texas A&M has lost to App State, which, by the way, lost to Texas State last night. Lost to Texas State. So we're just going to put that out there, too, if we want to make the comparison of Kent State and Texas State and try to put all that together. Do what you will with it, but absolutely made Alabama fans go nuts. It wasn't what I was trying to do. I was just trying to understand why people say that Georgia sucked when they can barely beat Missouri, but Alabama's playing a good game against Texas A&M. I mean, it's SEC. It's SEC play. Missouri might not be as good as A&M. That's not what I was trying to say. All I'm trying to say is I don't think it was a good game either. I think it was Alabama just was not playing very good football, and Georgia did it the week before. Sometimes you got good games and sometimes you don't. So it is what it is. It is what it is. All we can do now is prepare for Vandy because that's what we got coming up. Vandy at home, 3:30 kick again. I think we get that CBS slot again. I believe it's at 3:30. I may have to double check that. But we got Vandy coming this weekend. We'll put all the focus on that, see if we can't handle business and look like Georgia has looked week in and week out. Starting the first few weeks, not as good these past couple weeks, getting back on track this week. And we'll prepare for Vandy, and I'll check in with you guys come Friday when the Thursday episode drops Thursday night late, and we'll check in with you guys Friday when that time comes. Go Dogs.